Hello and welcome to Chess with Chewy. This is Chewy and I'm Simon, and this is a packet of sliced chicken. The BBC kindly asked me to write and present a documentary series on chess, and specifically on the future of chess and whether or not technology would kind of spoil chess, or whether it would completely solve it in the way that Noughts and Crosses is solved or Connect 4 is solved. It was a wonderful thing to do. It had to be a radio series because I'm too ugly for television. In fact, and this is a true story, I had a chat with a guy who ran BBC Television, and I was sort of saying, well, I'd love to do a TV series, but really I'm just too ugly. And he said, no. He said, we have ugly people on television. I think, it's not impossible. Which was not really the answer I was looking for. Anyway, today we're going to focus on beauty, and we're going to focus on a beautiful game between Boris Spassky and David Bronstein. So these are two of the great Russian players. Spassky was world champion, and many of you may know had a big match with Bobby Fischer during the Cold War. It was a very important match which attracted a lot of international interest because it was all about the clash between the different systems, the kind of Western system and the Soviet system. But this is Spassky v Bronstein in 1960, when the Russians were dominating the chess scene, and actually it's in the Soviet Championship, which was a bit like the World Championship. In the same year, Spassky used the King's Gambit to defeat Fischer in a wonderful, interesting game, actually. Spassky was probably the best player of the King's Gambit amongst top players historically. Now, again, this is a general video meant for everyone. It's not going to be super hard or super technical. It's meant to be fun and interesting and kind of open to as many people as possible. So there's an interesting question, which is, should you try this at home? In other words, should you play the King's Gambit in your own games? And I would strongly encourage that. It's a really interesting opening. It leads to some fascinating tactical issues. It's basically sound. I mean, when you play the King's Gambit, probably black has got more chances than white, but it's ever so marginal. There's better moves for white. So let's just open the game, right? So white plays pawn to king 4. Black plays pawn to king 4. This is where the King's Gambit is played. So knight to f3 is a better move, objectively, kind of mathematically a better move. Do you want to get down, mister? Knight to f3 is a better move. Knight to c3 is probably better too, because that's the Vienna game, and that sort of allows you to develop a piece and reserve the option of playing f4 later on. So by playing the Queen's Gambit, it's a little bit worse mathematically, but it's fascinating, and it's a move with so much history and so interesting, as this game shows. So Boris just goes ahead and plays it, f4. David Bronstein accepts the challenge and accepts the pawn, so he accepts the gambit. And Spassky plays the most solid line, the most commonly played line, which is knight to f3. And what this immediately does is stop the queen coming to h4 and giving check. Now, there are other ways of playing it. You can play pawn to d4, you can play bishop to c4, and then deal with the queen check when it comes. I've seen Magnus Carlsen playing that in Blitz games online, but knight to f3 is a sort of accepted, most common approach. Bronstein almost plays a gambit in response. So he plays pawn to d5, and his basic idea is to say, right, I want to break up that e-pawn, I want to break up white's centre, and I want to get my pieces moving. So all of a sudden now his queen's bishop is allowed out. Where's Chewy? He's over there. Spassky takes, which is the standard move. And then Bronstein develops his bishop onto d6, defending that pawn on f4. So this pawn can be a bit of a problem for white because it's really near the king, and it sort of stops the queen's bishop getting out, doesn't it? The queen's bishop would like to take it, but Bronstein's already lining up to kind of defend it and stop the queen's bishop getting out. Spassky develops the queen's knight, and actually he is known for developing the queen's knight early in the King's Gambit, and this is really early. But given he's so good at it, perhaps we should all take notice of that. Bronstein brings the knight to e7. For what it's worth, that's the move that the computers like. So it's a very, very accurate move. You might think of moving it to f6, but he moves it to e7. Spassky, very natural move, pawn to d4, just to try to get control over the centre. That's a very sort of sensible move. Bronstein castles to get his king to safety, although perhaps not quite as much safety as he would like as the game develops. And Boris A just moves the bishop away to allow himself to castle, and B puts it on a square where it's pointing at h7. And it's worth noting there's no knight defending h7 either, so it's actually already a bit of a worry. Bronstein plays knight to d7. Again, that is an engine move, so that's a really, really accurate move. And he's developing a knight here, developing a piece, very sensible. He could develop the queen's bishop, but actually that's not what the computers want to do. But you can see a case for like bishop to g4 or bishop to f5. You could see why someone might want to do that. So knight d7, white castles, which is just a move he has to play. I mean, he wants to get his king safe, and he wants to get that rook onto the f file. So that's a move that he's got to play eventually. And all of a sudden now he's thinking about, can I capture this pawn on f4? But he can't at the moment because it's defended. Bronstein plays pawn to h6. Now this is understandable. I think he's worried about the knight coming into g5 and attacking that h-pawn. So this is understandable. It's not quite the best move in the position, but it's understandable. You know, black could have played his d7 knight to f6, for instance. And now Spassky comes up with a brilliant move here. Really, really good move, which is knight to e4. So putting his knight in the centre, threatening to swap off the d6 bishop, and giving away that front d-pawn, which Bronstein chops off. But this now opens up a whole range of interesting possibilities, because the first is Spassky can play c4, hitting the knight. Now, the knight could retreat, but actually those pieces have not got many squares, and with those pawns fast approaching, you know, black could easily get a piece trapped. I mean, for instance, knight e7 loses a piece instantly to pawn c5. But even knight f6 looks a little bit uncomfortable to me. It looks a bit cramped because the knights are sort of treading on each other. You know, they're sort of fighting for the same squares. So Bronstein says, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to move it right into white's camp onto e3, forking the queen and the rook, which would be an absolute disaster were it not the case that white could just take it with a bishop. Although, giving up the dark square bishop is quite a big deal. Black takes back. Black has got a comically advanced pawn. I mean, that pawn is really lost touch with its comrades and colleagues. More comrades in this game, actually. And actually, it's going to play a really important role in the game as we go on. Spassky just pushes that white pawn onto c5. So that bishop was vaguely threatening, looking down at white's king, and now it has to retreat back to e7. And as we'll see, that creates problems. That's all building up. Often in these games, just small positional factors just accumulate, and then all of a sudden you get some tactics emerging which depend on the positional factors. White retreats his bishop to c2. He has a plan here which many experienced players will recognise, which is queen d3, get the knight out of the way, and then land the queen on h7 defended by the bishop. So if white had 4 moves here, he'd go bishop c2, queen d3, knight anywhere, queen h7 checkmate. Of course, white doesn't have 4 moves. But still, that's the germ of the concept, and it's often good to think like that just to see what white's got in mind. Bronstein plays rook to e8. Now, actually, I would be slightly critical of this move because I think that he's giving up on defence of the f-pawn. And actually, that turns out to be an issue. I mean, you could almost smell it because the white rook's looking down the f-file. And so you've got to, so, you know, good idea putting the rook in an open file, but unfortunately that rook was needed to defend the f-pawn. And actually, I mean, the engines want to play f5 here, okay, but you could play knight f6. There's other moves to be played. So rook e8, Spassky just goes right for it, you know, play direct, queen d3, and now this threat is becoming, I mean, anyone as black needs to take it very seriously, the threat of that knight moving out of the way, and then queen h7 check, king f8, queen h8 checkmate. Black pushes the pawn, and this begins an absolutely fascinating sequence of chess. It really does. So you might be able to guess white's move here. If you are, you're an absolute genius. Please feel free to pause the video and have a guess. Nothing wrong with that. It's all good fun. But I would suggest this is one of the hardest tactics problems you'd ever have to solve in your whole life. So, you know, why not? It's all fun. So white's move is knight to d6. Now, I'm doing a lot of yoga at the moment, and my advice at this point would be, if I was Bronstein, would be to focus on the breath, perceive the awesomeness of the universe, and just take in what you see before you. Because what you see before you is almost like a sort of visual work of art, or sort of a painting or a tableau. There's so many complicated things going on. So the first thing, what I say occurs to me is that black can take that knight with the pawn. So that knight is attacked by a pawn. If black does take the knight, the queen lands on h7, check, king goes to f8, queen goes to h8, checkmate. So taking the knight's not on. The white knight is also attacking the rook, which is a bit annoying, because a knight's worth 3.5 pawns, a rook's worth 5 pawns, and so that's an exchange white wants to make. So black's a little bit worried about that, props. But then black looks down and realises that, well, black already probably knew, because he's a brilliant player, but that his pawn can take the rook with check and turn itself into a queen, which white definitely needs to address, because if he doesn't take that queen, it's kind of checkmate. I mean, it's not checkmate, but he has to take the queen. So black could just take on f1. Now, black doesn't do that. Black chooses to play knight f8, which is a move which makes a lot of sense. He's covering the square h7, and he's doing so in a way that where the knight sort of can't be chopped off. In other words, if it's on f6, it's a little bit more vulnerable. But on f8, it's actually, no one can get at it. So it's quite a good move. You see that in the Queen's Gambit Declined as well. I think particularly, well, in various lines of the Queen's Gambit Declined, in the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined, you see this idea of the knight going to f8 to defend h7. And Spassky, of course, just sack a piece, sacrifice the knight. So it's not complicated enough, so let's make it more complicated. We take the pawn on f7. Now, who knows what is going on? The king can take that, but then the knight at f3 can move with double check, so even the pawn taking the rook won't stop the check. Of course, black can take the rook. Of course, white's knight's attacking black's queen. There's just a million things going on. And sometimes these are called kind of evergreen games or eternal games because people feel like you could analyse them till the end of time and still not really understand them, which is wonderful. It's like a sort of infinitely deep work of art. Although more on that later when we talk about computers. Anyway, black finally says, right, I'm going to take this rook on f1. Check. What are you going to do about that? And I've got a new queen. White's reasonably obvious answer is you take with the rook. So now that rook is looking down the f-file where the knight is. Bronstein doesn't choose to take the knight on f7. If he did, it would lead to disaster. In fact, he just sacrifices back a bishop. I mean, he's so much material up. He's a rook up, so it's not really about material. A rook for a pawn, strictly, but a rook for a pawn up. He gives the bishop back in the hope that he can swap the queens off, maybe defuse this attack, That's often what people do when they're under attack, is give some material back in the hope of neutralising. White just takes it off. Thank you very much. Black now offers a swap of queens. Now, Spassky doesn't want to do this. Not at all, because he's got a raging attack going, and his own king's very safe. So often when you're attacking, if you've got an attacking initiative, swapping the queens is often not what you want to do, although not always. Often in chess, there are so many rules, and there are occasional exceptions, but basically, the queen's an attacking piece, you want to keep it on. Backs up to f4. Bronstein puts the bishop on f6, which is a sensible move. He's just trying to interfere. He's trying to block the f-file. He's trying to interfere with white's pieces. Spassky moves his knight into e5, attacking the queen, defending its colleague or its comrade on f7, just generally infiltrating the black position. The black queen moves away, doesn't want to get taken. And now, and this shows, doesn't it, we talked about this diagonal and the importance of this diagonal, but you got this bishop moving onto this scary diagonal where if the knight moves away now it's check. So the bishop's defending the knight on f7, which is super. But also if the knight moves away it's check, which can unveil all sorts of complicated combinations. The knight can take the pawn on h6 or move to d6 and attack the rook. Can do all sorts of things. So Bronstein starts swapping pieces off like there's no tomorrow. He takes, and there is going to be no tomorrow, by the way, in this game. He takes on e5. White takes back with check, but for now the material balance is sort of just still hanging in there. In fact, black has slightly more material, but it's no way worth it. The king runs, and now Spassky plays queen e4 check, and at this point Bronstein resigns, because he can see what's coming. But because we like fun, and we like to see what's going on, and we're not quite ready to give Chewy his chicken yet, we're going to have a look at what the options are. So probably the best option, and the option the computer prefers, is to put the pawn in the way. Pawn g6. Now, that pawn's defended by the knight, so the first thought is let's liquidate that knight, chop it off with the rook, which is giving up material, but now that pawn on g6 is right for taking with the queen with check. king has one square, h8. The knight can come to f7, which now that would be checkmate, except the queen can take it. So he's got to give up his queen, which is essentially now the end of the game. Bishop takes, so white now has a material advantage, but more importantly, white can take on h6 with checkmate, because if he takes on h6, it's check, queen's covering g7, bishop is covering g8, take on h6 is checkmate. He's also attacking the rook, so, you know, black can do desperate things like check, king goes there, come back, it doesn't matter, it's checkmate. So Bronstein resigned at this point, which was sensible and kind of makes sense. So this game was featured in the James Bond film Spectre, and there was a villain in it called Kronstein, who was seen playing the white side. It's not actually exactly the white side of this game, because white's D and C pawns were removed, because I believe someone involved with the movie, the producer or the director, was worried about copyright and thought chess games might be copyright. P.S. They're not. So this was recreated in Spectre, and you may be wondering what these images mean in the top right. So these images, those of you who are close to the chess world will know that that's a symbol for AlphaZero, Google DeepMind's program AlphaZero, and Stockfish, which is the strongest chess program in the world. And the point is, these computers have come along and given a new perspective on this great work of art. So they've come along on this game, and they've actually said some interesting things, which is, well, objectively, mathematically, this move by Spassky, the 15th move, the most beautiful move, it's actually not correct. Actually, what Spassky should have done is, it's a bit unclear, but probably should have just chopped off the pawn with his queen. So he probably should have taken the... Yeah, it's a boring move, right? It's the move that a normal chess player would play. Just chop off that pawn. Actually, that move leaves white winning. And actually, knight d6, actually now black can make a draw. So what black should have done here, what Bronstein should have done, is to take an f1, and then when white takes back with the rook, actually his bishop can take the knight on d6, queen h7 check, king f8, and actually black can wriggle away with a draw here, although it would be a very brave human to do it. And it's very important to say these computers are so super strong that, you know, it's very hard for any mere mortals to keep up, particularly in these very complex positions. And the question is, does this invalidate the work of art? And my answer is emphatically no, it doesn't. A, because it can be beautiful and enjoyable. B, I think the computers bring extra insight into the beautiful position. C, games are played between humans anyway, and actually, I mean, I read an article in The Economist that basically said, just because there's a motor car that's faster than a human, we still do sprinting races, we still do running races. We know that sometimes technology can outpace us, but it doesn't make a running race less interesting. So as a battle between two humans, it's absolutely beautiful. Two humans who actually really liked each other, by the way, and got on. And also, I think there is still beauty, even if the beauty is slightly flawed. I think it's just the grounds for more examination. So the picture montage says, beautiful work of art, you know, computers have destroyed it and throw it in the trash. But actually, you know what? That's not really what I think. What I think is beautiful work of art, computers have enriched it. Maybe we can see the last picture as a piece of contemporary art. And so, to finish this wonderful video, we are going to give the dog a piece of chicken. Chewy, would you like some chicken? Come on. You want some chicken? Come on, mister. Okay, he's not going to eat it on camera. Come on. We'll give him one more piece on camera, come on. Here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. Dog eats chicken. Bye, y'all. Look after yourself. Keep safe. Enjoy your chess. See you again soon. Oh, if you'd like this video, please press like. And if you'd like to see more, you can press the subscribe button. We'll be in touch. Bye bye.